Hello and welcome to this special Inspire Virtual Poetry Festival edition of Book Chat. Now, normally, as you know, we talk to writers in this slot, but we've branched out and we're going to be talking to a publisher. This is a publisher who had only set up in 2012, has already won awards, specialises in poetry, short fiction and children's work, and is currently based in Birmingham. And it was founded and is now run by Editor-in-Chief, dog's body, bottle washer, designer, Emma Wright. And Emma, thank you for joining us today. It's lovely to see you.
Hello, Claire. It's nice to see you.
Did that introduction did it sum up all your roles within the organisation?
Yes, I sometimes describe it as wearing many hats. So I think now I've been, even from the start, I think I was trying to give the impression of being a big company. And I think people are often surprised that it's just me. So they'll often address me as our dear team or Emma Wright and her colleagues, and I think it's just me, and there have been other people in the past of freelancers and friends, but right now it really is just me.
It's interesting you say that because when you look at your website, it's a very full website. There's loads of information. It looks lovely, and your list is very big. So was that a very conscious decision to start? In fact, I love your motto. Do you want to tell us your motto and explain, because that completely sums it up?
It's small press, big dreams.
Brilliant. So from the beginning, did you know that when you were contacting people, writers, publishers, presses, that you wanted to give the impression of already being established and knowing exactly what was going on?
Yes, it's weird because when I started, I'd just come out of a job in a very big publisher, Orion Books, which is part of the Hachette Group, which is one of the big publishing groups. So I think the combination of that and being, I was 26 at the time, I think I just really wanted to seem very legitimate and very kind of together. So I was thinking very hard about how to seem like I was definitely knowing what I was doing, and I was definitely a good operation that had big plans. And I think as time's gone on, I've realised that the strength of the Emma Press probably is the fact that it is quite small and it's very curated and people respond to that. And even now, so 8 years in, I still find myself unpicking the things that I thought were very important to the things that big publishers are and what I should be. Just I guess the idea of professionalism and what being a real publisher is, and that's quite a weird thing to think about, but I just realized I had so many preconceived notions of what big publishing and real publishing was, and things have got better since I've been kind of letting them go and thinking, actually, that's not for me.
I suppose to some extent being young and being tech savvy and being able to know your way around, being a digital native, essentially, probably you're just about a digital native, aren't you? It gives you the advantage, which means that you then younger people can actually present themselves in that really professional way, and perhaps some older publishers need to catch up. So that was a built-in benefit without you realizing it, maybe.
Yeah, I think definitely the reason I was able to start was the fact that there were all these free or very cheap tech solutions out there. So I think if I'd started even 10 years before, I would have had to have known a lot more or had more money to get started. Whereas now, or 8 years ago, you can start a publishing house just by set up a free website. You can try to sell the books on online, but publicize them through social media. You can run a free newsletter or a mailing list. And you can print books relatively cheaply as well, and also typeset them yourself. So I have a friend who used to typeset just in Word, because I was at Orion, I got used to InDesign, so I was typesetting on InDesign from the start. But still, if it had been the older days with kind of, having to pay someone to kind of put the type down, or paying a professional typesetter to do the screen or the sheets or whatever it was, however things used to be typeset, that would have probably put me off, or there would have been too many stages. Whereas as it was, I had the idea of starting and then published the first book maybe in about 8 or 9 months. So
super quick.
Yeah.
You can be much more flexible and agile, can't you, as a one-woman band?
Yes.
What was that first book, and what was it that actually made you want to start a publishing house? Because you talked about practically how you've done it, but it's quite an extraordinary thing for someone of that age to decide they want to do.
Yeah, well, originally, to be honest, it was because I wanted to be a book illustrator. So the original book was The Flower and the Plough by Rachel Piercy, who was my friend from school and then university, and then of beyond, and still is my friend, I'm happy to say. And she was wanting to get her poetry out there more, and I read the poems and loved them. And I was trying to put together a portfolio of my illustrations. So the idea for the book came about through thinking we wanted some sort of calling card, but more elaborate than just a card. And I guess because that's how I started with poetry, and I was learning about editing poetry and typesetting poetry and publicizing poetry, it kind of made sense to carry on. So that's why poetry is such a big part of the Emma Press. But over the years, I've added in extra things. So eventually, I would like the Emma Press to be a kind of a fully formed publishing house, publishing all sorts. But I'm adding in different genres as I feel comfortable with them, or as I come across books which I just have to publish, and then I kind of figure it out along the way, as I did from the start.
Okay, and well, you've been very successful, because I know that one of your pamphlets got the Poetry Book Society pamphlet choice,
Yes.
and didn't you also win a prize for a pamphlet publishing as well, the Michael Mann Prize?
Yeah, the
Um,
Michael Marks.
Michael Marks, sorry, not Michael, but also your children's clipper, who of course is the all librarians and people who use libraries will have heard of them, have also put your books on shortlists that normally are full of the big boys. So how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that achievement?
Oh, it was really, really exciting. I think, well, so the very first children's book, a children's poetry book published, was in 2015, and that got onto the Clipper shortlist. So that was very exciting and kind of gave me a really nice boost of feeling, okay, maybe I'm on the right track, because I really wasn't sure how to publish children's books at the time. And then the following year, Kate Wakeling's collection Moon Juice, which was the first single author children's poetry collection I published, that got onto the shortlist and then won. And that was back in 2017. And then I haven't been on the shortlist since then. So I was kind of waiting and thinking, oh, maybe I'm getting worse at publishing children's poetry. And then this year, there were 2 out of the 5 on the shortlist were Emma Press books. And so at that point, I just thought, well, I don't mind if well, obviously the authors and the illustrators and translators would like to win, but for me, I feel like I've already won because it's such a big deal to have 2 books on the shortlist as a very small publisher. And also the books that were on the shortlist were both important in their own way, and I was really happy that they would get that spotlight and further publicity, and also hopefully get introduced to more librarians and children.
Yeah. Do you feel, I mean, that's illustrated a point that perhaps panels of judges and people who are looking at books are widening their viewpoint a little bit more, are looking outside the expected big publishers, and are actually much more open to the idea that something will come in from left field they're not aware of, because it certainly didn't used to be the case, did it?
Yeah, I feel like that's happened even in the last 5 years or so. I think there are now so many small publishers that are really kind of punching above their weights that it's impossible to really say, oh, they're just small publishers. It's impossible to dismiss them because they're winning prizes, they're making headlines, they're publishing really important texts. And I'm definitely, I guess I'm feeling the benefit of that too, just kind of being carried along with that and hopefully doing my part in that as well. And it's nice to feel attitudes are shifting, that it's not, you can be a small press because out of choice partly, and it's not just that you're doing it for a hobby, not that there's anything wrong with that, but as also you're doing something very important and you're contributing to the ecosystem. I think that's really important as well, because a lot of change comes about through the choices made by small presses.
Absolutely, and you're finding those writers that again might have been knocking on the doors of other people and overlooked, or possibly are completely new, and you've discovered them, but you're putting them in front of judges, and that's really important as well. And I wondered, how did you go about building a poetry list? Because that seems to me to be a massive job in itself. Just thinking that, where do you start? Who do you ask? How do you develop that?
Well, I guess the first idea I had was to do an anthology, because I thought then I'm kind of putting myself out there and maybe some people will respond to what I'm looking for. And actually that worked well. So the first anthology I did was the Emma Press anthology of mildly erotic verse, which
that old chestnut.
Yeah, and again, I wasn't hugely conscious. It was just the thing I wanted to do because yeah, it was around the time of 50 Shades of Grey. I was thinking about eroticism and how poetry is quite a good vehicle for genuine eroticism. But I guess because of the subject matter, and it was a bit out there, but also if you found the idea kind of amusing but appealing in the way that I did, I think that some people really did respond to it. So I've ended up kind of continuing the relationship with a lot of the poets who were in that original book. So I've published pamphlets by them, I've published more poems and anthologies, or I just still know them as friends. So that was, I think, I maybe had about 300 people, maybe it's less, maybe it's 150, but over 100 people submitted to that anthology. And then me and Rachel, who did the first book, we read them, and we worked quite closely with the poets back then. So we went to visit every single person we could. It was quite a big undertaking. So that was the first way I announced the Emma Press, was through doing that call. And because that had worked well, I went on to do quite a lot of other calls. So that's partly why the list grew quite quickly. It's because I was trying to not typecast the press as a love poems and sex anthology press. I was trying to show kind of interest in other areas. So the first year, 2013, where the books came out, there were 2 books, and then the next year there were 15. So I was really ramping it up to show the range. So the calls for submissions were a really big part, and I guess it's not quite passive, but it was a way of, I'd push them very hard. So I'd send out the calls to as many literature organisations as possible and post online. And then I think they grew as more kind of writing communities or kind of writing groups heard about them. But then
it makes absolute sense. It really is a sensible way to do it, because then instantly submissions are all, writers love submissions, and so suddenly you're just going to get them all coming in, and then you can maintain those relationships and they'll tell their friends. So perfect way to do it.
Yeah, and that's carried on really. It is quite time consuming, so I'm often kind of doing a lot of soul searching about whether I can carry on and how I can make it sustainable, because I get more and more. So last time I did a call for poetry pamphlet manuscripts, I got 700 manuscripts.
Okay, that's a lot. That is a lot.
Yes. So, but at the same time, I think it is a good way to increase access to publication and to be able to showcase different voices. So I do want to carry on doing that.
And then from those, is that where some of your single author collections have come from that process? So a particular poet you're interested in, you then encourage or commission them to do something else?
So most of the pamphlets I've published have come about through the submissions, and then a few of them have been, I might have seen someone's work, kind of, say if they were performing, or if I know that they're writing a sequence and I've kind of seen them online or something, then I might send an email and say, oh, by the way, is this something you're interested in publishing? And then with translations as well, so I had one here. So this is the first translation to join my poetry pamphlet sequence, poetry pamphlet series. And translations tend to come about in slightly different ways, because you tend to form relationships with translators who get a sense of what you're looking for, and then they propose writers that they've come across they think might be a good fit. So for this one, the translator sent me some sample poems, and I think he'd been sending me things for maybe a couple of years, but I think he eventually realised I try to publish a range, but there are some things which are particularly appealing to me. So he trimmed it down and
persevered there. That was good perseverance on his part. Yeah, I mean, it is an eclectic list, and you have got particularly, I mean, culturally and geographically, you've got poets from all over the place, and different languages. I know there's a focus on Indonesia is mentioned quite a lot, and some of the poets from the Baltic states, and also some European. Is it Spain and Netherlands mainly? How has that come about? Is that accident or design?
The specific countries is probably more happenstance. I'm deliberately wanting to publish more books from other countries, especially in the children's list. And then as for which languages they've been translated from, that's to do with which translators I've come across and who's decided to really try, I guess. So yes, all the translators are very very hardworking and have been sending me different ideas and proposals and translation samples. But the reason there's there are quite a lot of books from Indonesia and the Baltic states, and that's because of the London Book Fair focus. So in 2018 it was the Baltics, and then 2019 it was Indonesia. So there was a special push, and there were just more translation samples and more meetings set up, and the Baltic focus coincided with when I was starting to feel ready to publish translations, because I already had a couple. So actually the poems The Wind Blew In, one of the Clipper shortlist ones, translated from Spanish, and Super Guppy, which is a children's poetry collection from the Netherlands. They were on the back burner, so I've been working on them for the longest, but they only came out last year, and that was because I was kind of gearing myself up for it. And then there was this Baltic push, and there was extra funding to produce very beautiful hardcover, full colour books. So that was what tipped me into thinking, okay, I'm ready, I'm going to give it a go. And then with the Indonesian titles, one of the very first poets I published back in 2014 was Indonesian. So she'd been really encouraging me to engage with the Indonesian markets, and do launches in Jakarta and lots of things. And I hadn't managed to do all of them, but I had kept at the back of my mind that probably would make Ikta happy because she's very nice.
That sounds like quite an organic way of doing things, as well as it's rather than having a master plan. It's inevitable you've got to be responsive to what's available at the time, and perhaps also because you can do things quickly, you have the advantage that you can then move fast on something and say, okay, we'll publish it now. I'm sure it's interesting to know that things like the book fair focus actually works, and that those people do come through, and that we suddenly do find authors from different places who we wouldn't normally know about coming through there. So it's good to know that works effectively. You mentioned the lovely hardcover books, and something that's common across everything you publish is that they do really look beautiful, and there's obviously a lot of thought gone into the design and the typesetting and so on. Was that something that you were very keen to do from the beginning?
Yes, it was. So when I was working at Orion, I was in the ebooks team, and it was, so this was 2010, 2011. It was around the time ebooks were taking off quite a bit. I think since then they've plateaued, but there was quite a lot of panic in this traditional publishing house about the ebooks going to take over. And meanwhile, I was in the ebooks department thinking, oh, I'm not very popular. But I had a lot of time to think about why you would have a printed book, and I do think obviously there is a place for ebooks, and I read ebooks myself, but there are some books you do want to have in print, and I'm a very tactile person, and I've got books that I've treasured and kept since I was very little. So when I started publishing books myself, I thought, well, if they're going to be prints, and if I'm going to be paying to print them, I want them to be beautiful inside and out. And also, I think, how do you sell poetry to people? That was the other thing, because I was thinking, well, how do I get someone to pick up a book that is poetry and they might not read poetry? So I was also trying to make books that would just look very pretty and appealing, and welcoming and accessible, and thinking that maybe I would override any kind of residual kind of exam fear about poetry, and maybe make people think this could be something that I might enjoy.
Yeah. Yes, so that's, I mean, one of the reasons it seems very ambitious is because there's nothing more difficult than poetry and translation to sell in this country. You know, I know from bitter experience. So it is amazing that you're doing that. But I think it's important, because what you're doing is you give it the same weight as you do to an English language book. You make it look as lovely. You put it in the catalogue, and maybe that's the way you do it. You just say, this is the array that we've got, and you know, you make sure that you write the bit of copy you write, and the things people see are tantalising, and maybe they'll be brave enough to try it. Is that the ethos?
I think definitely. I think, I did think a lot about whether I was going to have a separate list for translations, because some publishers would have a series that was a series, and I ended up thinking it's the same. I wanted to approach it in the same way as I approach just publishing poetry, and that, yes, it's poetry, but in another way, it's no big deal. It's not scary. I'm not going to put a very serious kind of black and white photograph, and kind of, you know, just not going to make it look very unwelcoming. And the same with translations. yes, they're translations, but also it's just text, and it's a book that you might enjoy, and it's interesting that it's translation, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that it's got to be read with a very serious face. So
I know
so
exactly
they're
what you mean.
always, yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, it just makes sense to the list is the list, and it's varied, and people can pick and choose, but everything is even. You know, everything is treated with the same weight, and then it can speak for itself, can't it? So that does seem that's something very striking, I think, about when I looked at the website and I saw and the books that I know come out of Emma Press as well. They're massively varied. They all look lovely, and I do, yeah, I think that's a really clever way of doing it, actually. Let's hope it continues to work. We haven't got much longer, actually. We need to, because we're trying to keep these quite short and sweet. But I wondered if you could finish by giving advice to anyone who's in your situation, thinking, actually, you know, maybe they work with some writers, maybe they want to publish some of their own work and their friends' work and collaborate, or perhaps look further afield and publish other people. What advice would you give them for the next 12 months? What should they be doing or thinking about that might help them achieve their goal?
Well, I'm a big believer in reverse engineering, and that you can work out a lot of things just by working backwards from where you want to be. And so the hardest thing is figuring out where you want to be. And I think it's worth just spending some time thinking what you'd like your books to look like, you'd like people to feel when responding to your books, and that will help you pick the books. So maybe that's the final goal. So thinking, how would you like people to feel about what you're publishing, and how do you make that happen? So whether that's through the choice of what you're putting into the book, how you produce it, how you tell people about it, and yeah, so from visual to the text side of things. So just you can work all the way back if you have a sense of what that end point is. So at the start, I guess I was thinking how I would be. So I was thinking of myself as my ideal reader, and what would appeal to me, and what would make me want to tell other people. And then also with a side helping of thinking about my aunts, who are very supportive, and what my aunts might like. And
you have got the lovely anthology. You have got anthology of aunts, and yes, I have full sisters, yeah. And so we are professional aunts. So we love that book. But yeah, also that brings me. I must bring up the other point. But you do state in your the information on the website that it's a feminist press, and the way you've just described that process, it's a very female way of doing things, isn't it? Rather than just thinking about the look and the branding and so on, it's saying, what would I feel if I read this book? What do I want someone to feel? And is that important to you? I mean, do you recognise that as a female trait, or am I stereotyping?
I think one thing is probably. Oh, can you hear me now?
It's fine now. Yes, if you're. Yeah.
I think one thing would. Okay. I guess maybe the main thing is that I didn't have that many role models when starting, so that's partly why it was a reaction to a lot of the big publishers ultimately being owned by men. So there was a sense of wanting to be an obviously kind of woman-run press, but then, you know, I probably would have gone about it differently if I'd seen myself more in the. I think it's probably maybe more of an unusual way to start a press, just because I couldn't kind of look. I do now know lots of presses that are run by women, but they do tend to be kind of smaller presses. There aren't so many of the bigger presses. So I think it's a kind of a thing to do with role models, I guess.
But again, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense to me that you think about what someone's going to feel about what you're producing, and then work backwards from there. That sounds brilliant. Where can people who are watching this find out more information? Do you want to say anything about send them to your website and anywhere else they could find you?
Yeah. So it's the Emma Press everywhere. So the emmapress.com for the website. So you can see all of the books. If you click on books at the top tab, you can see all of the books I've published. And then there's the web shop as well. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, it's all the Emma Press. So it is kind of hard to type in, but the right number of E's and M's, sometimes I get it wrong myself.
It's quite short. It's quite nice and short. Brilliant. Well, I hope that after this, people will go and check out. It's an absolutely beautiful website with really lovely books, beautifully designed, and lots of people that you will never have heard of, but once you've read them, you will enjoy them. And so thank you very much, Emma, for a whistle-stop introduction to the Emma Press, but much appreciated. Thank you for talking to me, and good luck with all the future projects. Bye for now.
Thank you, Claire. It was lovely.